Welcome to Appointed Counsel, a podcast presented by Tennessee Court Talk for those involved in indigent representation. I'm Joe Byrd, lead attorney for the Indigent Services Team of the Tennessee Administrative Office of the Courts.
Episode 13, Supplier Identification and Finance and Administration. On today's podcast, we have special guests from the Fiscal Division of the Administrative Office of the Courts. Today, Shoni Nakang, the accounting manager here at the AOC, and Tasha Furness, who's one of our accountants, are here, and we're glad to have you. Shoni, maybe introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Joe. So as Joe mentioned, I'm the accounting manager for the Administrative Office of the Court. So in a nutshell, my job is to oversee all of the accounting functions for the agency, which spans from vouchers, payment cards, travel expense documents, anything accounting related. I am your girl.
And you've actually worked for the state for a number of years in different agencies, so you know how these things work.
I do. Yes. And so it's going on 11 years and a couple more months. And so yes, as we like to say, we live in a cruel world as an accountant. So.
Yuck. Great joke. So, Tasha, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a little newer to the Administrative Office of the Courts.
I am. I've been here for 7 months now, and I transferred here from Wichita, Kansas. I am an accountant, as you said earlier. I'm responsible for the supplier maintenance process for the agency, and I also review the indigent claims once they have been batched into Edison.
Yeah, that's a big role, right? I mean, the indigent representation is a big portion of the AOC's budget, isn't it?
It really is a big portion.
Yeah, and it's a process too. I don't think people understand all the details in the process, that sometimes it's not a creation of the AOC, but it's required because these are tax dollars. We have to be good stewards of them. Plus, we know the comptroller will potentially come in and do an audit from time to time, and they're going to make sure that we're doing our job and applying the rules and processing these claims right. As a matter of fact, the AOC processes between 80,000 and 100,000 claims a year. Last year, I think it was up to nearly 96,000 claims in the fiscal year. That's so somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 claims per week come in from all 95 counties across the state, circuit court, general sessions courts, juvenile courts. And so I think it's sometimes easy for attorneys to think, well, I submitted my claim to the AOC, and now Fiscal, you're cutting a check. Why aren't you just cutting a check for me? But there's a process for us to review the claims, and then there's a process for a payment to be made, whether it's a direct deposit or for a check to be written, right? I mean, Fiscal doesn't cut a check, right?
That's correct. And so, as Joe stated, Fiscal doesn't cut the check. So Joe's team, they graciously examine all the claims by ensuring that everything is correct in regards to the Supreme Court rules and regulations. And once that occurs, once their approvals have been decided upon, those claims batch into the state's accounting system, which is called Edison. Edison pretty much holds all the accounting records for the state, so a copy of the claim does follow. Actually, it comes into Edison. So these claims batch into Edison in a process called a voucher. So the fiscal's responsibility regarding the voucher is to review the vouchers to ensure that we are complying with different guidelines set forth by the Department of Finance and Administration, whose main responsibility is to oversee accounting for the entire state. So once Fiscal has did our part in reviewing, and when we say review, we're ensuring that different aspects of the voucher is correct, i.e. the math is mathing, the supplier ID is right, the remittance address is correct, then we provide a set of approvals. Once those approvals are provided by Fiscal, those vouchers batch overnight into a payment queue, if you want to call it that way. And that queue is released the next morning by the Department of Treasury into a payment. And that payment normally is released in regards to either an EFT or electronic funds transfer or a paper check, but it depends on what the claimant decides in regards to their payment method.
Yeah, so let's break down time-wise, right? So because we only have 8 auditors, we have to process those claims, and our goal is always from the time the judge approves them until we basically batch them, as you said, into Edison. And Edison is the pervasive system across the state. It's this, for instance, those of us on state payroll, right? I mean, our payroll is processed through Edison. If we're going to get reimbursement of expenses, those kinds of things,
Everything's
it's
in
through
Edison.
Edison.
That's correct.
So, and other agencies have a system. They won't have an ACAP, but they'll have some sort of system that has to interface with Edison.
That's correct.
And there's a division that kind of takes care of the technology side of that involves them, STS or something like that.
Yes, the Strategic Technology Solutions Division, which is actually a part of F&A as well. They take care of ensuring that those interfaces work correctly in regards to ACAP, which the ALC handles, and Edison, and
they're great to work with. We've worked with several people from STS, and so we go through. And ACAP has its own issues. None of my listeners that's lost on any of my listeners. They know that ACAP, we do have some complications sometimes with ACAP, but then it has to interface then, and this batching process is something that you're talking about goes through Edison. So if our process takes about 30 days, because we try to do the claims in the date order that they're received. The process of Fiscal doesn't necessarily take too many days unless there's some issue that comes up where a claim gets flagged for some reason, and then it's up to F&A through their process. And I usually say to everyone, anticipate it taking 7 to 10 days from F&A. Now, though, if they choose to have a check sent, it's not just F&A, but now you add on the Postal Service.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we've seen some where we've had to cancel checks and have checks resent. No fault of the AOCs or of F&A, but they get lost in the mail. And then it gets complicated whenever the checks do finally show up if the attorney accidentally deposits those checks, right? That can really be a hassle.
Yes.
So that doesn't happen for the number of claims that we have, percentage-wise. That doesn't happen, but it's a fairly complex situation when it does happen. I mean, sometimes I know people might get a little impatient with us in terms of trying to fix a problem, but I think that they just have to understand the process, and it still is a process to not just protect, to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, but also to make sure that there's checks and balances in the system. Matter of fact, Shoni and I have become friends over the 20 months or so that I have been here, almost 2 years, and I don't think you'll be offended when I say Shoni has a little bit of an obsessive-compulsive side. Would you agree with that, Tasha?
I would agree 100% with that.
So one of the
No
things
objections here.
that Shoni is good at is keeping basically a tracking of what happened and the emails and everything. And sometimes some attorneys can get lost in it. So what you all may not know is, most of us who go to law school, we didn't go to be business administrators, right? So right off the bat, it's okay. We have to accept the billable hour, but then we have to do this business administration in our office, and we have to work with things like ACAP, and then we have to deal with this accounting side of things, which it becomes frustrating.
It does.
And we can understand that for anybody, right? And for me too. I mean, certainly accounting was not part of my life, though to use your joke, sometimes my world might be a cruel one. Now, the attorneys will hear me talk a little bit about the comptroller's office. I think I said that earlier. The comptroller is not part of the finance and administration, or what we call F&A, is it?
No, they're two totally separate entities. So when you think of F&A, they both maintain oversight in regards to the state. So I guess the comptroller's office is ensuring that, I guess you could say they're ensuring that the laws and the provisions that are set forth by the state are being enforced, whether or not, it's different rules or guidelines that they're enforcing it. And by enforcing it, it means that you're doing the correct paperwork, you're following the correct provisions. F&A's main role is to ensure that they are maintaining financial oversight over the state. So that means that money is going where it should be going, and it is being appropriately accounted for as well. So I think of them as two totally different entities, but they have to marry well together in order for the job to be done.
And from the AOC, we have to work with both sides.
That's correct.
As any state
Yes,
agency
that's correct.
does.
Yes.
So when these claims are batched over into these vouchers, it might be easy for the attorneys to think of them. There's a function in ACAP that allows them to print a convenience copy. It's sort of a summary of the claim. That's what F&A actually they get like that summary copy, right? The convenience copy. And now we don't have to have the personal identification off of the orders because we're not shipping the orders over. But whenever there is something that might have that has to go over with the claim, we still, the attorneys and we still have to make sure that all personal identifying information is redacted, right?
Yes, that's correct.
That's what I was thinking. So, all right. So, Tasha, you may be able to chime in here a little bit more because of what you do. Because one of the things that I always tell attorneys is the number one reason your claim gets delayed in processing is when we have to return it, and that can take a couple of weeks going back and forth. Like, for instance, I don't get to look at my queue every day for complex and extended. My schedule doesn't allow me to do that. But a huge time drain in terms of claims is when there's a problem with supplier ID. Can you walk us through a little bit about supplier ID information and the W-9s a little bit? Just give us a general overview of some of that.
Okay. The supplier ID, if Shawnee, correct me if I'm wrong, when I think about the supplier ID, I think about it as being an identification in our accounting system to identify that vendor. Would that be correct?
That is correct, but it's associated more so specifically with a tax ID. So if you have two different tax IDs, you'll have two different supplier IDs. So it is a very unique identification number that is associated with one tax ID.
Okay, now remember, attorneys don't take accounting, and they don't necessarily, like me, I'm confessing, me too. I didn't get into this to be a business administrator, but when you say a tax ID number, we're talking basically about a Social Security number or an employee identification number, an
yes,
EIN
so
number.
a Social Security number, a EIN, a ITIN, which is a number that is for an individual that may not be a legal resident of the United States. So it's any type of tax ID that is used to file taxes. And so anything that can be used. And it's also dealing with foreign documents as well. So, yes.
So we say in every monthly newsletter, we put a section down that says, understand that if you make a change in your supplier identification, address, in ACAP, it still has to be done that doesn't automatically change it in F&A, right? Help us out on that. Explain what that means. What are we talking about?
So as Joe stated, so ACAP and, ACAP, which is the system that the indigent claims go through, it has to interface with Edison. So when it interfaces, it has to be like a handshake, okay? So whatever's in ACAP normally batches over to Edison. So if it batches over into Edison and that individual has changed their address in ACAP and it's not the correct thing in Edison will automatically stop the payment. So it's more so done as a security measure. We don't want payments to go to the wrong individuals. So if you've changed your address in ACAP and it batches over into Edison and we see that claim and there's an inconsistency, we'll reach out to the supplier. We want to ensure that their payment is correctly going to the correct place, whether or not it's a bank or whatever. And so
you've used two terms
Sorry.
that we need to define.
Okay.
No, it's just that it's kind of inside baseball for you bean counters.
Okay.
You accountants. Supplier and vendor. Attorneys don't think of themselves as a vendor or supplier.
It's something that's, so the state years ago, and I think this, so supplier and vendor is something that is interchangeable. And so a supplier is a vendor. So I think of a supplier as someone who is, the state is either contracting to do services or they're doing services on behalf of the state. So it's one of the same. You know, you'll hear some individuals refer to it as a vendor. You'll hear some individuals refer to it as a supplier, but it's tomato.
Right. So when you say supplier ID, supplier information, what is supplier information that's important? Tasha, what is that? What are we talking about? The information of a supplier. I think we've covered tax ID, but what other issues are part of that supplier information?
The supplier information, I guess it would be the address, the remittance address is very important. As Shawnee mentioned earlier, we need to make sure that is aligned with ACAP, whether or not that supplier ID is active or inactive. That can happen. It can get deactivated for several reasons. One of those reasons could be if the remittance address is incorrect.
Yeah, it could be a lot of factors, like Tasha said. And when we get into the remittance address, not getting into the weeds, it could be if the supplier has changed firms. We have a lot of ACAP attorneys that work at different firms. So when you're thinking about we say remittance address, when you're thinking about where your payment is going, okay, where have you directed your payment to go to? So if you want that payment to go to your house and it's in Edison, or it's in ACAP and you have it is in your house, it needs to match that in Edison. If you have that payment to go to your accounting firm care of you, if you've changed firms, we need to change that over in Edison. So when we say remittance, we're saying where are we remitting, where are we sending that payment to? So I would say that the remittance address is correct. It has to be correct, the supplier ID and the tax classification. So we have attorneys that sometimes may change their tax classification. They may go from an individual to a partnership. So those things have to be a match. And it's important to be a match because during tax season, 1099s are sent out based on the information that is on file. So we don't want them to have any troubles filing their taxes. So we want to ensure that we're doing our part to make sure it's correctly recorded in Edison.
And sometimes what gets frustrating to attorneys is when they find out we put them on our side in modified status, which essentially means we're not processing claims, but they don't understand we're doing that
as a safe measure. Yeah,
to make sure claims aren't getting paid out to someone else, because then we have to unravel it. They have to unravel part of that. And I like what you said, that it's not just moving from firm to firm, but even if the attorney says, okay, I'm going to incorporate as a professional limited liability corporation, now I have an EIN. Well, that's a change.
That's very true.
It may be going to your same address, but now that, because the information on that W-9 form is going to be where that 1099 is going.
That's correct.
So all of that has to match. And so as important as that is, and the time delay that can cause, because we're in line with all the other state agencies when supplier maintenance is trying to make these changes, right? We don't get to bump up. I've had some attorneys say, can you put in an expedited request? But if F&A and supplier maintenance, which is part of F&A, I think.
That's correct. They're a division within F&A.
If they were doing expedited for agencies, they would never get anything done. Everybody, they have to take them as they come. So in order to avoid that, right, what's the best advice we can give attorneys? And I always say this at the end of the year, because at the end of the year, we've got to put a deadline, because those 1099 forms are going to go out, and if they get kicked back to F&A, they're going to immediately be put on hold, and they're going to be put in modified status. So what's the best advice we can give for attorneys? I always tell them, you gotta follow those instructions on the W-9. You gotta keep the information updated. But can you give them any general, who should they contact and all that?
I would say the best advice that I could give them is kind of like a doctor's office. If something has changed with them, we need to know. So if their address has changed, we need to know so that we can ensure that everything is matching. If it doesn't match, ACAP will put you in a modified status, but F&A will also deactivate the supplier ID, which is an even bigger cumbersome process. And I would say, and if it doesn't match and something has changed and you send over your W-9, make sure you're submitting the correct version of the W-9, which is the 2024 version, and make sure you're filling it out based on the instructions, and make sure you provide a hand signature on the W-9. And if you can do that, then 9 times out of 10, we can get you squared away quicker than normal. And so,
yeah, I have some attorneys that they don't understand why it has to be a wet signature, but that's the fastest, most efficient way, because there has to be a certification or something if they try to do an Adobe signature.
Yes. And so there's some type of so supplier maintenance does accept digital signatures, but if you do it through them, then you have to do the submission yourself through supplier maintenance. So you don't have a person that you're speaking through. You have to submit it in a queue, and then it has to pass some type of validation check that they have. So most individuals, their Adobe is not passing that validation check. So just to shorten the process, we ask that they do a wet signature so that we can go ahead and expedite the process.
And you are so great to help us, because from our side on the audit team, we don't know all the ins and outs of the W-9s, and Tasha helps us, and she connects with one of our staff members, Alyssa Hudson. But I think we will send them a form or something with some instructions, right?
Yes, usually when they get ready to update their information, their supplier ID, or register for a supplier ID, we'll request a W-9. And Alyssa, she'll normally send the W-9 directly to the W-9 email box, or they'll send it directly to us, to the W-9.
And isn't there's a W-9 email box that we use, right, that we have set up to handle all that? And then I guess you and Alyssa
we kind of go, interchangeable, kind of hand in hand. We work together with the attorneys to make sure that the W-9s are filled out correctly, making sure that, like we said, that the signatures are on there, that the tax classifications are correct, that the remittance addresses are correct.
One last thing, and I think this is really just a note of explanation. Sometimes when attorneys, they get an email advice sometimes on the vouchers, on what they're getting paid for, and they don't see all the individual claims that are related to that voucher, but they don't understand that the voucher is actually produced by F&A. It's not something internal, so we don't have that. But how can we help them when they don't see something that's in that voucher? What's the best way for us to handle that?
So it just depends on the process that they want to do. So supplier maintenance does offer the process where they can have their own access to Edison, but it would be on their side. So if they are on the supplier side versus the state side. So if a supplier wants that transparency to see when their payments are pending, when their payments are coming, what a voucher, the details of the voucher, they can contact us and we can get them the information where they can get their own login. And to be honest, I feel like that sometimes makes it a little bit easier on them because they know what's coming, what's in the queue, so it's more of a transparent process.
And of course, I do know, like I said, attorneys, we don't get into this to become administrators of businesses, and that's just another sign-in for some attorneys and another password to remember, and they won't take my mother's middle name anymore, or maiden name anymore. So I get when they don't want to do that, but if they can just sort of transition into doing that, all of that information really is more at their fingertips, isn't it?
It is. And so, it's a very, very easy process. And to be honest, my understanding is that if you have that sign on, if you want to, they can also initiate the change to change their own address as well. But then it goes hand in hand. If they change their address with supplier maintenance, they have to make sure that they change it with ACAP as well, because it has to be a match. And so I just feel like it offers a little transparency to the process.
Well, and I appreciate you guys being here, because I do like to always point out, and it's not F&A, they're only doing what they're supposed to be doing following the Internal Revenue Services, but when we try to get them to get these W-9s filled out properly and everything, it's not us being particular.
No,
right?
It's not. It really isn't. It's they have a obligation to ensure that these documents are filled out correctly. And like Tasha said, just make sure that you're filling it out. Make sure you're not correcting it. Not waiting. Think of it as a legal document. It's something that you have to treat. They have to keep on record. So, God forbid if something happens, the IRS wants a copy of it. We have to be able to present that, and it has to be unaltered in its most original form, filled out correctly.
And you said if they do want to get that access to Edison, they can contact us. Do they just contact a particular email address here?
They can contact the W-9 email, w9.help@tncourts.gov. And I feel like Alyssa may have a set of the instructions as well. And we have a set of instructions that supplier maintenance has provided to us to be able to distribute to suppliers, and we'll make sure we get that information over to them.
And I think all of those links are actually on the tncourts.gov website on the indigent team. And I think it's also on the ACAP landing page where they can find links or those email addresses. So, well, listen, I appreciate you both being here today.
For more information, check out the Indigent Representation webpage at tncourts.gov.